Hi everyone, back with Bassingtons. I hope you're all well. I hope you're all keeping safe. A lot of people have asked me, the difference between Omega and Rolex, and I thought I'd create a vlog on this, break it down into two parts, and break it down into four sections. Each section would score maximum points of 25 points, and at the end of it, we can say which Bassingtons think is currently the better brand, and we'll start off with the actual brand. Both brands, Rolex and Omega, have a long history in watchmaking. For years, Omega was the stronger brand, the higher end brand, and dominated. It famously won the race to the moon. The Speedmaster beat the Daytona. And that was sort of the pinnacle, in my opinion, of Omega. Then it all went a bit wrong in the late 60s, early 70s, when there was an influx from Japan of quartz movement watches. Omega made the strategic decision to develop quartz movements and chase that market, and I felt that was completely the wrong strategy to do. Rolex, by contrast, didn't make the same mistake, mainly because they couldn't afford to do so. They didn't have the wealth that Omega had. They did dabble in quartz movement watches like the oyster quartz. So when it came to the 1980s and there was a return to mechanical movements, Rolex was in a far stronger position than Omega because they weren't saddled with debt. In contrast, Omega, the banks effectively owned them, and they were forced in the 1980s into a merger which ultimately became the Swatch company, and which we know today. And the Swatch group owns an awful lot of Swiss watch companies. Rolex obviously has still remained independent, owned by the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation. But the 1980s was really where it took off for Rolex, in my opinion. I would always say it was always a nouveau riche brand. I mean, you only have to look at that gold crown. I mean, it's just so naff. It's something that's more akin to fairground bingo or amusement arcades. It's not something that should sit on a luxury watch. It's certainly not something that should sit with a luxury brand, but it's really worked effectively for Rolex. In the 1980s, it was all money is God philosophy, and people weren't afraid to flaunt the money. We, went away from being the very reserved nation that we historically had been to being sort of a bit more louder, a bit more brasher. Everybody wanted a two-tone Datejust, and if you had a two-tone Datejust, you had a BMW. If you didn't have a two-tone Datejust, you had the Date in solid gold, and you would have the Porsche. In contrast, Omega has always, sold to a more discerning market, the professional middle classes, like lawyers, doctors, medics, and they tend not to spend the money. So consequently, the 1980s were not good for Omega, plus the fact that they didn't have a particularly great product range and they were, constrained financially. We then progressed to the 1990s and Rolex is still dominating. Omega's starting to turn it around though, and they're starting to turn it around with the product range. They launched the Seamaster Professional Diver 300, great product, which they cleverly endorsed the James Bond franchise, famously worn by Pierce Brosnan. That was a key turning point. Equally, them adopting the George Daniels coaxial escapement, which was famously turned down by Rolex, and Patek helped Omega enormously. We then come to Millennium, and times and attitudes have changed again. And gone are the days of people wearing three-piece suits in the boardrooms. The dot-com was all there. Kids were running the companies, and they were wearing jeans and t-shirts, and they wanted steel sports Rolexes, and the go-to brand was the Rolex Submariner. And again, Omega is still trailing in the wake of Rolex. And then we get to sort of round about 2011, 2010, 2011, that sort of era, the development of the maxi case with Rolex. But I think this is where Rolex really started to take off. The guys and girls on YouTube's just shit on YouTube and, really did promote Rolex very heavily. And, that really developed in about 2015, 2016. It's not just backed up by the guys and girls on YouTubers. It's on YouTube, that is. It's the influencers on Instagram. And we are today where it is. The brand is massively overhyped. It's really difficult to get your hands on one. And you've got to go grey market and pay 2, 3, 4, sometimes 5 times above list price. I do think they have huge problems with the brand. I've discussed this in earlier vlogs. It's not good, the fact that you potentially could be mugged for wearing a Rolex. Also, I think they're alienating the core market, which was the sort of the nouveau riche 1980 market. Well, that's now old money. And old money does not like the fact that talentless TV celebrities are wearing Rolex watches, that Instagrammers are wearing Rolex watches, that sort of cryptocurrency dealers are wearing Rolex watches. And which brand are they going to? They're going to Omega. And I think Omega today has a very, very, potentially is in a very strong position to take the slack from Rolex if they play their cards right. But we're not talking about now where we currently stand. We're looking at the long history of the two brands. And marks out of 25, I've got to give Omega 19. Rolex, I've got to give 25 out of 25. I don't think they're just the best luxury watch brand out there. I think they are the best luxury brand, full stop. We move on to section 2, and that is the product range. And I'm just going to talk currently where we stand with the product range. I think Rolex have, used a tried and tested formula for years that has served them very, very well. It's an oyster case. They just tweak the dials, the hands, maybe the bezel, and you usually get an oyster bracelet or a Jubilee bracelet on that. However, it has started to look very tired recently. And even the guys and girls on YouTube have been critical of Rolex with the last two sort of product launches. They reintroduced the Batman, they reintroduced the 36mm Rolex Explorer. They haven't been well received. I don't think the brand is very innovative. I do think it is very, very staid. And I think they really need to start and mix it up a bit more than what they're doing. As I say, it's been very successful for them, but I think times are beginning to change. If you contrast that with Omega, their product range is wide and varied, and they're very, very innovative. So, 2020, they launched the Omega Constellation, picture of it coming up now. 2021, they launched the new Speedmaster, picture of it coming up now too. And then in 2021, they launched the Omega Seamaster 300. Another picture of it coming up now. And you will see those three watches are completely varied, totally varied. Contrast that with Rolex. Here is, and I've done this before and I'll do it again. Here is a picture of the two-tone Submariner coming up. Picture of the two-tone Sea Dweller coming up. Picture of the two-tone GMT coming up. Very, very same-ish, not much variation there. And as I say, just a little bit tired. So marks out of 25, I'm going to give Omega 22 out of 25. I think that product range is that good. And marks out of 25 for Rolex, well, this may surprise a few of you. I'm going to give Rolex 25 out of 25. For the simple reason, if I was drawing up a list of the 25 most iconic watches, I would have 5 in there by Rolex. Yes, I would have the Submariner, I'd have the Date Just, I'd have the GMT, I'd have the Day Date, and I would have the Daytona. And I don't know of any other watch brand that can achieve that. Every watch brand may have 1 or possibly 2 in there, or the top watch brands, I should say, but I don't know any watch brand that has 5 in there. And I've got to give marks out of 25, 25. That's how good the product range has served Rolex. So that's part 1, everyone. I think you realize where this is heading. No surprises that Rolex is ahead of Omega. But in the meantime, stay safe and stay tuned.